Welcome back to We Want Picks. I'm Artem MMA, and I'm going to be breaking down the first round of the light heavyweights and heavyweights portion of the 8-man PFL 2025 tournament. This fight card is going to be taking place this Thursday at 7 PM Eastern Time, so in only a couple of days' time when this video does come out, so definitely tune in on Thursday night for this one, because I think that it does have a chance to be really good, but it could be pretty bad. That's kind of how the big weight classes do go with light heavyweights, and especially heavyweights, is some of the fights can turn out being pretty boring. But of course, the thing about the big guys is they are the big guys. They do hit the hardest, and we could potentially see some finishes this Thursday night. If you did want to check out my article for this event and also my articles for other events, do check out the We Want Picks Premium membership website. And if you do sign up using my code ARTEM, you do get 10% off your first month of membership, or whatever the first membership is that you so choose. And let's get into it. I'm going to try and make this one relatively fast because it's only 9 fights. And of course, I do need to get back to studying in a moment. So the first fight of the night is going to be between Polizzi and Rafael Xavier. To break this one down pretty simply, it's a wrestler versus striker matchup where Polizzi is a wrestler and he is a wrestler that shoots for takedowns very regularly, and Rafael Xavier is a striker. Rafael Xavier is pretty underrated. He actually did have a career fighting for Octagon, which is a promotion that I personally do rate quite highly. I think they're quite one of the bigger promotions in the world, especially in Europe. And Xavier had a relatively successful career there, but he didn't really fight the best guys on their roster. And then, of course, he did go out there in the PFL and he fought against Simeon Powell. And this fight's definitely worth noting because Powell is going to be on this card as well as Xavier. And Xavier nearly knocked out Simeon Powell at the end of the first round in that matchup. Xavier's always going to be a dangerous guy in the first round, but he does slow down a bit in the second and the third round. He does fight from range, and he fights from range pretty well, and he is quite accurate, which could be a problem for Polizzi because Polizzi doesn't have very good striking defense. This guy has taken a lot of damage in his career. The chin is definitely not what it used to be, but I think that just given the style of Polizzi, where he is just constantly shooting for takedowns, that is a nightmare stylistic matchup for Xavier, which is why I'm going to side with Polizzi, and he is the favorite at -230 right now. We can move up now to the first heavyweight of many that are making their PFL debut after being released from the UFC. Rodrigo Nascimento, as you guys may or may not remember, was the headliner of a UFC event less than a year ago, and now he's no longer in the promotion. He lost to Derek Lewis, then he lost to Alexandr Romanov, and guess what? Alexandr Romanov is also fighting on this card, and Rodrigo Nascimento has to take on Abraham Babley in his debut. And Abraham Babley's a very talented guy. I do think that you could make an argument that he's undersized for the weight class. You know, he is listed at 5'10", and he does look a bit small in there, especially when you do consider the fact that he is weighing in at 240, 250 pounds, and he is 5'10". But the thing about Babley is he is a very fast guy. He's a very strong guy as well, and his wrestling is pretty solid. He mostly is a wrestler. His takedown defense is good as well, but I think the boxing is going to be a bit of the X factor in this matchup against Nascimento. Babley's coming off a very close loss to Slim Trabelsi, who is arguably one of the best heavyweight prospects in the world right now. If you guys may or may not know, the UFC tried to sign Trabelsi, but he had so many contract issues, and then eventually Trabelsi ended up back with Ares FC and now PFL. That's probably a situation you guys don't want to learn about here, but if you want to look into it, you can. Rodrigo Nascimento, we know what he brings to the table. The striking's not amazing. He doesn't move his head at all, and he wants to get the fight down to the ground. And if he wants to get the fight down to the ground, and he doesn't really do too much. He does just control and top control. There is a submission ability there, which of course he did get a couple of subs in the UFC, but aside from that, I don't think he's going to be too much of a threat to Babley. And I'm actually picking Abraham Babley as the underdog in this matchup. Babley's a slight underdog here, but I do think the fact that I think that he can defend the takedowns of Nascimento, and when the fight's on the feet, I like the boxing of Babley, so I'm going to go with him in this fight. And Babley, if he really wanted to, I think he could go for the takedowns as well. And now we have what I think is probably the most intriguing matchup on the card for a couple of reasons, because both of these guys have, I guess, what you could call potential red flags, because Sullivan Cauley hasn't fought since 2023. It's been a year and 8 months since he last fought. And Marcelo Nunes is a 36-year-old heavyweight cutting down to 205 pounds for the first time, in my knowledge, in a long time, to now fight at 205 in the PFL. And I don't like the move for Nunes. Now, Nunes actually did get quite a few wins in the PFL at heavyweight when he did fight. He did actually beat a couple of guys, now not really the best guys, and then of course he gassed out and got TKO'd by Maurice Green in a very embarrassing loss there. But he did submit the former Ultimate Fighter Jordan Heidemann. He submitted the former UFC fighter, knocked out the former UFC fighter Danilo Marquez, and the former Contender Series fighter Dylan Potter. So he does have wins over guys that have been at least either in big promotions like the UFC before, or on the Contender Series. But the thing about Nunes is he wasn't a fast striker at all when he was at heavyweight. He is a grappler. He wants to get the fight down to the ground, but he doesn't really have much speed on the feet. And now that he's 36 years old, cutting down to 205 pounds, I personally don't really like the move. I think he's going to be at a very significant speed disadvantage here, and especially in this matchup against Cauley. If you're unfamiliar with Sullivan Cauley, he's a Bellator prospect through and through, a guy that Bellator built up from the beginning of his professional career. I guess the biggest win on his record is Ben Parrish, maybe you could argue there, but you know, he knocked out all of these guys in the first round. He did get a bit of grappling exposed by Luke Traynor, but Trainor's a 6'6", absolute menace as well, who gets a lot of first round finishes too, and is continuing his win streak since beating Sullivan Cauley. I think in this one here, as long as Cauley can defend the takedowns and the fact that he's been training with Ryan Bader recently, the takedown defense definitely should be improving. And as long as the fight is on the feet, I would be shocked if he didn't get opportunities to land massive shots on Marcelo Nunes. So I have to pick Sullivan Cauley to win this matchup by knockout. But I will admit, I think the line, even though it is only minus 160, is a bit wide. As I said, there's a lot of unknowns in this matchup. Nunes moving down a weight class, and then Cauley not fighting since 2023. So we'll see how that goes. I'm picking Sullivan Cauley, even though he is the favorite in this fight. And now we have another UFC heavyweight, of course, now Karl Williams, who did leave the promotion, I think you could argue, on somewhat controversial terms. If you guys do or do not recall, Karl Williams was, this is what someone said, allegedly told that he needed to strike more or else he was going to get released from the promotion. He ended up winning on the Contender Series, went on a 3-fight win streak where he used his wrestling to win decisions, and then apparently he was told that he needed to strike more, which is why he went against the former Glory kickboxer Janata Deniz and striked in the first 2 rounds before finally looking for some takedowns in the 3rd round. And then he lost that fight and he lost his UFC contract. So that was an interesting situation. And now he's taking on a pure wrestler in Oleg Popov. But the thing about Williams is he hasn't fought a pure wrestler since he did fight Jimmy Lawson, the former D1 wrestler, in the Contender Series on short notice. And that was actually when Williams was a light heavyweight. He come up a weight class to fight against Lawson and beat Lawson then. Oleg Popov, he made it to the finals last year. As I did say, he's a pure wrestler. He kind of only has wrestling, but he wrestles well. He's got very good chain wrestling. He's a surprisingly athletic guy for someone that, you know, is built the way that he is. And he made it far. He made it well. You know, he finished Steve Mowry, who was a guy, Steve Mowry. Maybe I can't pronounce his name correctly because of my accent. I don't know. But anyway, Steve, he is a big guy for heavyweight. He's a very athletic guy for heavyweight and a good wrestler. And Popov took him down and put him in a crucifix position and finished him off with ground and pound top control. And he did that for the rest of his opponents. You know, Linton Vassell is of course a guy that's not known for good takedown defense, but he still was able to go out there and out wrestle Vassell with not really too much problems. And then of course he fought Goltsov, but got submitted pretty quickly. Popov, I think in this matchup is going to be the better wrestler. I think that it's going to come down to 2 guys that are going to definitely be wrestling against each other, and I think Popov's going to be the guy moving forward, shooting the takedowns and potentially getting the takedowns. I do like Karl Williams a lot, to be honest, but I think that it's also worth noting, and I forgot to say this before, this is a very short notice fight. I think that this fight was announced 1 or 2 days ago, maybe 3 or 4 days before the event's even going to start. So Williams has stepped up on very short notice to take on Popov here. In fact, there's no odds on this fight at all at the time of me recording this video, but I am still going to pick Popov to win the fight by decision. And now we have Alexandr Romanov. I believe this is the final former UFC heavyweight to make their debut on this card for the PFL, of course that is. And I like this matchup a lot for Romanov. This is the kind of fight that Romanov should go out there and make a statement. Tim Johnson is past his prime now at this point. You know, he was actually out of the promotion, and then he stepped in on short notice a couple of times. He had the pretty interesting fight against Danilo Marquez, where I believe he knocked down Marquez, and then Marquez kicked him in the balls. If you've seen it, you've seen it's like a double knockdown situation. It was odd. And then he stepped in on short notice, I believe, against Goltsov and Nemkov, and lost quickly in both of those fights by getting taken down and dominated on the ground. I think that Alexandr Romanov can do that exact same thing. I think Romanov can go out there and do what he's quite well known for doing. If you guys recall, before, of course, Romanov took a big step up in competition, Romanov was just dominating everybody. You know, he was absolutely destroying everyone. You could argue that he should have got a draw against Tybura. He should have 10-8'd Tybura in the first round at elevation and then he gassed out. But nobody really just throws around Marcin Tybura like Alexandr Romanov was doing. And I think that's definitely worth noting when you look at this fight against Tim Johnson, who is a pretty slow heavyweight now at this point in his career. He's 40 years old. I think Romanov can go out there and just get the takedown and get the submission or the TKO to ground and pound pretty quickly. I'm going to go the first round finish for Alexandr Romanov here as he takes a step down in competition in his first move to the PFL. Bet Online says Romanov's minus 450. If that's the case, I would parlay him with something you like in the UFC, but it looks like Betway has him at minus 650. So maybe Romanov's going to close as like a minus 800 favorite by the time the fight rolls around, but genuinely I like Romanov to get a very quick finish in this fight. And now we have Karl Albrektsson fighting against Simeon Powell. This is actually another very interesting fight and one of the hardest fights to call on the card. And I understand a lot of people will look at this fight and they'll just want to pick Powell because Powell is a very popular, talented fighter. And I'm not going to take that away from him. And I'm still picking Simeon Powell to win this matchup. But I will say this is not a good stylistic matchup for Powell. Powell, of course, was the star of PFL Europe. He's getting so many first-round finishes, so many quick victories. He was looking incredible. But then he fought Jakub Nedor, and Nedor, like, broke him down in less than a round. Nedor was just able to pressure him and land big shots, and after that, Simeon Powell's game plan, if he even has one, just went out the window. And the reason why I say Powell might not have a game plan is because he never throws combinations. He just relies on his size, his speed, his athleticism, and his power to get through fights. He doesn't throw a jab and a cross. He doesn't throw a jab and then hide a leg kick behind it. He doesn't do any of that. He just throws one strike at a time, looking for damage, looking for power every single time. You don't see Powell out there throwing many combinations. And the thing about Powell is the times that we've seen him look bad, it's against guys that move him backwards. You know, Xavier was able to pressure him early. Nedor was able to pressure him early. And before that, he was just fighting very low-level guys. But, you know, if you can pressure Powell's striking just kind of doesn't look as dominant as it typically does. And the thing about Karl Albrektsson is, despite me talking about this guy as a future champion in 2021, I'll be honest, you know, after he beat Valentin, I thought that Karl Albrektsson was going all the way. This guy has beaten, what's his name? Vadim Nemkov. It's in 2016, but he's still beaten Vadim Nemkov. And twice, and then he beat him again in 2021. And I think after this win streak, I was like, you know what, Karl Albrektsson, he's the man. He's going to go so far. And then he just kind of fell off a little bit. And the thing about Albrektsson, though, which is where I was trying to get to, Albrektsson, he is a pressure guy. That's like his entire game plan. Is Albrextson's going to come forward. He's going to throw boxing combinations moving forward, and he's going to shoot for takedowns as well. He was shooting takedowns against grapplers. He was shooting takedowns against Karl Moore, which of course didn't go his way, and Moore is also on this card. But Albrextson's going to go out there and he's going to do what he needs to do to be the guy in a dominant position. The problem that I have with Albrektsson, and this is where I really get worried with this particular matchup, is it was only not that long ago that Albrektsson was fighting on a couple of local shows and Chuck Campbell knocked him out. And he didn't really just knock him out, man. Like, he rocked Albrektsson Albrektsson was rocked multiple times before the finish came. And I don't like that, considering it wasn't that long ago, and now he's taking on a guy with a lot of power. And I don't like seeing Albrektsson get KO'd like that. You know, he did lose to Grant Neal, who's a very talented guy. He lost to Karl Moore, but he didn't get hurt on the feet in those matchups. He got hurt on the feet 5 months ago, now taking on a guy that does have KO power. I'm picking Simeon Powell here. Simeon Powell's minus 165, which is somewhat surprising. I did think that a lot of people would just bet on Powell, perhaps somewhat blindly, but as I said, this is one of the closest fights, one of the closest matchups on the card. And I think it's a very tough one to call, despite a lot of people picking Powell. And I am picking Powell by KO. But definitely there is some danger in that matchup. Now we have ACJ, the former UFC fighter, the former PFL champion. Antonio Carlos Jr. is back again for another season, taking on Karl Moore in this first round fight. Now ACJ, if you're unfamiliar, had a pretty successful UFC career, did end that UFC career with a 3-fight losing streak, but he was 7-5 in total in the promotion, so not a bad little run for him. He come into the PFL, he won the $1 million. I do think that in hindsight, of course it's 2020, he did beat a very weak light heavyweight division when he won that championship in 2021, just kind of given the, you know, Emiliano Sordi, you know, was as a form, I think the 2019 champion or something, but Sordi, you know, like, I mean, I hate to do this, but like, he's not on a good run. He's not on a good run. But ACJ, he won the championship, he won a couple more fights, and then he went off to Brazilian reality TV. That did not go well for him at all. He left the reality TV show with a few allegations, unfortunately, and he just come back to the PFL. So that's kind of where we are now. He come back, and he looked bad, I'll be honest. He looked really bad against Polizzi, and then he looked okay against Byong, but Byong is a very good stylistic matchup for ACJ, which is why I picked him in that fight. This one here I don't think is a good stylistic matchup for him, because Karl Moore's also a grappler, and the thing about ACJ is if he doesn't have his BJJ, he's kind of got nothing. He doesn't really have much striking, he doesn't really have much wrestling. Karl Moore is a grappler that can do it all, and the thing about Moore that I've been so impressed with recently, especially if you watch his more recent fights, is he is striking so much more than he used to. He used to wrestle a lot more, but he's really developed his strike, and he trusts in his striking a lot more. He fights behind a lot of rangy shots, he fights behind a jab. I will admit at times it does look very awkward. I think it was this fight against Albrektsson nearly 3 years ago, I know, where they were striking and like he was looking at his corner like on the feet for advice at some moments. I thought that was really odd, but since then he's looked pretty good. I thought he looked pretty good against Corey Anderson. In fact, I thought the takedown defense looked very good against Corey Anderson in that matchup. Sorry. And I think that's important here against ACJ because Corey Anderson's a very good wrestler. Moore was able to defend a lot of those takedown attempts from Anderson. And ACJ, if he can't get the fight down to the ground, I think he's going to be at a striking disadvantage in this fight. So I'm picking Karl Moore by decision. I think once again, Moore is the favorite despite the majority of people picking him on the Tapology website. I'm going with Moore. I think Moore wins the decision. I think he's the more well-rounded fighter. As long as ACJ just can't take his back up against the cage or anything, I think Karl Moore should be able to go out there and get it done. And now we have another very hard fight to call. It is Valentin Moldavsky fighting against Sergey Bilostenniy. And if you told me that this was a bad stylistic matchup for Valentin Moldavsky, I actually would agree with you, because Sergey Bilostenniy is, I think you could say he's got the striking advantage here, and you cannot say in a lot of Valentin Moldavsky fights that he is the worst striker in the matchup. But the thing about Bilostenniy is he's a very dynamic guy. You know, this guy's got a spinning back kick KO. He throws a lot of strikes, he throws a lot of volume, and he's so fast for this heavyweight division. The weakness that I think that he does show, and I will admit he hasn't really shown this recently, is the strength in the wrestling and the takedown defense. This can be really showcased if you want to go way back and watch a fight on 480p filmed on someone's phone between him and Fernando Rodriguez Jr., where Fernando Rodriguez Jr. was able to clinch Bilostenniy for a very significant period of time. This was a disqualification, but he did knock out Tyrell Fortune there. Pretty good disqualification, I will be honest. That was pretty blatant to the back of the head. But since then he's looked good, and he's got his win back. against Fortune by submission of all ways to win. So yeah, good for Bilostenniy. For Moldavsky, I thought he beat Linton Vassell in their recent fight. I think they've fought quite a few times now. I think they fought 3 times now. Moldavsky, of course, lost to Vassell by finish, and then he lost to him by split decision. I thought Moldavsky won that fight. I don't want to go into it too much, but like genuinely, even if you just look at the stats, which never tell the full story, Moldavsky significantly outlanded Vassell, and even got his own takedowns in that fight, and got his own ground and pound off in that fight. That was just an odd decision that I do quite strongly disagree with. Moldavsky is a talented striker, you know, he is going to pressure Bilostenniy. Bilostenny's one of those guys that he wants to have the space to throw his strikes because he does throw so much volume. He does throw, like, pretty interesting strikes, like he does throw spinning attacks on occasion and stuff like that. But we've seen him weak in the clinch, and the thing about Moldavsky is nearly all of Moldavsky's takedown attempts come from the clinch, and if they don't come from the clinch, they come in a position where he can get to the clinch and get up against the cage. And that's in my opinion, from what I've seen so far of Bilostenny's his biggest weakness, and I like that for Moldavsky. I think Moldavsky's going to get takedowns up against the cage. The problem is against Vassell, he struggled to hold down Vassell, but I don't think that Vassell, the thing about Vassell is he's always had terrible takedown defense, but he's so athletic he can scramble. I don't think Bilostenny's going to have the same scramble ability as Moldavsky. So I'm going to go with Moldavsky to get the wrestling going, get the pressure going, maybe make it boring with the clinch. I don't know, but I'm picking Moldavsky to win this fight by decision. And Moldavsky, once again, is a -135 favorite, yet the majority of people are picking Bilostenniy. And now we can move up to the main event. I think this fight goes one of 2 ways. I think that either way, I will admit, it could be a boring fight. Phil Davis is a wrestler, and that's all he does. He wants to clinch up against the cage. He wants to knee the body up against the cage. He wants to get takedown and control and not throw ground and pound and not look for submissions. He just wants to hold you down there. And that's kind of what he brings to the table. If you can defend takedowns against Phil Davis, you're probably going to be in a pretty good spot. You know, Phil Davis is striking. It's not fantastic, but I will admit it's not really bad. You know, he does fight behind a jab quite effectively. He's got a 78-inch reach, and he throws a jab like nearly every 5 seconds. It's kind of insane how often he throws that jab, but it's always to close the distance. It's always to try and get a takedown. Rob Wilkinson, of course, former UFC fighter, former Israel Adesanya victim, but after that, you know, won the $1 million against Amari Akhmedov in 2022. And in this run in 2022, he looked unstoppable, man. He looked absolutely incredible. But then, unfortunately, we had a little bit of a 2023 PFL situation go on. If you guys remember this, I think it was genuinely like some of these cards, like 4 to 6 fighters, every card were failing drug tests. It was unbelievable. And both Wilkinson and I believe Thiago Santos failed drug tests in this fight. But Wilkinson failed for a high level of testosterone. And I will admit, since then, he just hasn't been the same fighter. He hasn't been the same active fighter. He used to be a guy that was throwing volume all the time. He used to be a guy that was potentially even shooting takedowns all the time like he did against Santos in that matchup. And he was just a very high volume, high output guy. He just like looked like he had an unlimited gas tank. Now, you know, he doesn't have that unlimited gas tank anymore, and he kind of fights like it. The volume has gone out the window. The takedown attempts are still there, but he gasses out like if he tries them. And then, you know, the last 2 fights that he had in his career, I will admit, they just looked bad. Like, he looked really bad against Oleg Yakshimuradov, who I know ended up winning and knocking out Impikasanganai, but like, man, you know, he just hasn't looked like the same guy. But the thing about Wilkinson is, one thing I can say, the wrestling's definitely been worked on because he has been wrestling recently. And I think that as long as the takedowns can get defended, I think Wilkinson is going to have a very significant striking advantage in this fight. He is going to throw kicks. He's going to be able to go jab for jab with Davis if he needs to. The problem with Wilkinson, though, man, I think he just has lost a lot of confidence. He isn't throwing volume like he used to. He's not shooting takedowns like he used to. Not like that would be a good idea against Davis, but you know, I mean, I'm going to go with Wilkinson to win the fight. He just needs to defend the takedowns and just throw and land more volume to win a decision, of course, which I think he can do in this fight. So I'm going to go with Wilkinson. Wilkinson's only -150 in this fight, but You know, I got the main event of the last PFL card wrong, of course, when Impa Kasanganay just, like... I don't even know what Impa did in that fight, man. He looked bad as well. So, yeah. Oh well, I'm picking Wilkinson. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you going to be tuning into this card? What do you like on this card? I know that typically a lot of PFL cards have a lot of very big favorites, but these are all relatively evenly matched up fights, and I think there's only really a couple of good spots which you can throw in your parlays, and I do think Romanov is one of those spots, I will admit. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.